spiders, rabbit slime, dead man's hair.
No, we don't keep those things in this house. We're vegetarian.
And that calls himself a magician.
Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 401. Kinda doing a bit of a Halloween episode this week.
Boom! Haunted house!
But it's also sort of a very uplifting episode in its own way. You see, over the past year or so, I've become aware of a pretty cool record label out there called Huang Chen Records. It looks like it should be pronounced Huang Quan, based on how it's romanized into English. But no, it's Huang Chen. I know this because of the band Imperial Circus Dead Decadence that I covered, Jesus, almost like 3 years ago on episode 251. Those guys ended up putting out an album that became my album of the year for 2022, and it had a song entitled,
読みより聞こゆ広告の塔と穂村の少女上がり
Yeah, that. But when I was doing a little electronic translation action on that song title, because let's be honest, I can't read these runes, the word Yomi, which is the Japanese word for the underworld, kept getting translated as Huangchen, which is in Chinese literally something like yellow springs, but it's one of the many different words that the Chinese have for what is essentially the underworld.
Jesus Christ, where are we?
Hell of the upside down sinners!
Point is, I learned a new word just by accident, just by being into metal. So don't let anybody tell you that metalheads are dumb. Anyways, I recognized that word when I saw it in the name of this record label, and it just so happens that said record label has been reissuing a whole bunch of really cool old school death metal albums. Stuff from Cenotaph, Demilich, Organic Infest, Xenomorph, Oppressor, Malediction, Morpheus Descends. I mean, obviously I already own most of those, but hey, you might not, so they're worth checking out. And they did have two albums that I did not possess that I ended up ordering from them, that being Corpse's Pull the Flood and Lucifixion's Indulge in the Macabre. Got them in the mail and they got real nice packaging, and they got Obi strips. But given that Huang Chen is a Chinese label, not a Japanese one, the Obi strips aren't in Japanese, they're in Chinese. Only albums I've got in the collection like that, which is pretty neat, but I find it kind of heartwarming that apparently there's someone over there in China that's got the same weirdo taste in old school death metal that I do. Maybe we're not all so different from each other after all.
Can't we all just get along?
And I'm going to be covering one of the albums I bought from that label this week, that being Lucifixion's Indulge in the Macabre. And that's why this is a Halloween episode, because this album, the only way I can describe this band's sound, it's like Razorback Records' early 2000s retro death, except from the 90s, so it wouldn't even have been retro back then. It's just real horror movie, Halloween sounding death metal with a real sense of fun and a whole lot of groove to it. Check it out. Got those real nice Carcass-style catchy drum beats. And here's why I say this kind of sounds like some Razorback Records shit. Because this is almost a little bit too fun for regular death metal, both in the softer parts and the harder parts like this one. That's a big, nasty chunk-style riff. This album's full of catchy shit like that. Or like this more winding, kind of tremolo-picked, eerie, melodic sort of riff. This song in particular is one of the catchiest on the album. Watch how they incorporate the vocal pattern here. Nice little Chuck Schuldiner style artificial harmonic there as well. Very Leprosy era Death-esque in that respect. And from there, they move across the pond to something a little bit more bolt thrower-ish. Nice little bass guitar stings there as well. The drum beat under it is total Slayer though. Very Lombardo-esque. You can tell these guys were fans of all different sorts of metal, and they figured out a way to make all of that work with their own unique sound. This fucking thuggish ass riff right here. This is when that Midwestern chunk style shit really comes out. Heavy enough to where I would almost consider this to be brutal death metal. At least during the riff sections like this, there's a lot to love if you're a fan of bands like Gutted or Baphomet or Ossuary, and it gets even heavier. Fuck yeah, dude. And here's another aspect of their sound that made me think of a lot of the Razorback bands that would appear later on. These solos all kind of sound like themes from old school 80s horror movies that you've never seen before. Just a really fucking cool style overall. Definitely out of step with where death metal was going towards the end of the 90s, which is fucking fine with me, because this is the kind of death metal I like. You know, between these guys, Lucifixion, and other bands like Leveled, or Ton, or the almighty, and I said almighty, goddammit, Gutted. I think you could make a serious case for there being a distinctly Ohio style of death metal, in the same way that you've got New York death metal or Floridian death metal or Swedish death metal. This sort of real mid-paced, catchy, fun-loving, groove-oriented thing going on in Ohio. I mean, at least you could expand it out to be part of a larger sort of Midwestern death metal style. If you were to go beyond the borders of the Heartland state and include bands like Phantasm or Oppressor or Afterlife or Morta Skuld, maybe even Cyanosis or Nunslaughter. There's a unique sense of groove to bands like this, particularly with Lucifixion when they do shit like start a fucking song out with what most bands would use as a breakdown. Nice little goofy guitar noise there. In instances like this, the drums grinding out that slower variation of a Lombardo-style Slayer beat, and the bass guitar are just as important as the guitars in making it heavy and fucking morbid. From there we move into another sort of like slowed down and warped bolt thrower style riff, and the transition after that goes fucking full Mortician, dude. Like 100% a Slaughterhouse style groove riff before they bring back in that breakdown riff from earlier, but played faster with some double bass under it to lead us into one of the heaviest riffs on the album. Here comes another cool weird bass noise. Fucking awesome. And the chunk style riffs continue to roll out before going into another sort of Leprosy era death, maybe even Consuming Impulse era Pestilence kind of choo-choo train riff. You know, like jigga 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 jigga. Great fucking trains! One of those kind of riffs. Again, a kind of riff that I myself am particularly fond of. I actually found out about this album way the fuck before I even knew that Huang Chen Records had it available for purchase, because I saw that crazy fucking album cover come up on YouTube. A lot of people see this kind of album cover drawn entirely in pastel, somewhat amateurish with real wacky, vibrant colors. They're like,
what the fuck is this piece of shit?
Not me, though. I personally fucking love it. It just oozes underground passion. I saw that cover and I was like, I gotta know what these guys sound like. And I'm glad I followed up on that instinct. And I'm also really glad that not only did Huang Chen Records put out the album, but they put on the Born Into Death 1994 demo as bonus tracks. I doubt anybody outside of a very select group of people in Ohio had fucking heard this demo, like fucking ever, dude. More sick Carcass style drumming, and then the guitar sound on this particular demo, depending on the mood I'm in, I might actually like it a little bit more than the sound on the full length. I can go either way. It certainly has a darker tinge to it, but I'd say overall I like the drum sound and particularly the bass guitar on the full length album a little bit more. No matter which one you prefer, the riffs are fucking excellent on both of this band's releases, as you are no doubt hearing right now. Really primitive and savage, but also intensely catchy and memorable. Coming up to another one of their signature breakdowns right here. It's gonna come in first as just bass guitar, then the other instruments jump in, and you get hit with a brutal fucking and you're just getting steamrollered by these bulldozer-ass riffs that eventually go into another chugga-chugga-choo-choo sort of thing. Great fucking demo, and the standout song on it, Toe Tag, opened up the demo so well that they decided to use it as the opening track on the album. Again, arguments could be made for preferring either the demo or the album version of this particular song. I decided to play you a little bit of the demo just to give a fuller representation of their discography. It's got this real nasty opening riff. Fucking drums here are excellent. And you might notice, it's still got that fun-loving sort of groove-oriented characteristic to the music, but this song's a little bit gloomier and more atmospheric, which is very appropriate for such a horror-centric, goosebumps kind of band. When you get into these more vocal-heavy sections, you really gain an appreciation for how much thought was put into cadence and rhythmic vocal structuring for maximum catchiness. This riff right here is one of my favorites from them. It comes in kind of grindcore and then it hits those two kind of rhythmic stabs. Super catchy. Then they loosen up a little bit, keeping that same sort of skeleton of the melody in that riff, but kind of jamming on it a little bit more, giving the bass guitar room to breathe, these little fill parts. Quite heavy, before eventually going back into that real gloomy sort of doom metal riff from the beginning of the song. The real desiccated guitar sound gives me a very autumnal feeling in the same way that Master's third album, Collection of Souls, or the first Acid Witch album does, and that's why I see this as a very Halloween sort of band.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
As you've probably picked up on, I love the demo and the album when it comes to Lucifixion, but I gotta say, there is one specific X factor that really elevates the album above the demo for me, and that's gotta be the lead guitar playing, because there wasn't really much in the way of leads on the Born into Death demo, but they got that second guitarist for the album, and what a fucking world of difference. There's that full-length album bass guitar sound that I fucking love so much, and here comes the harmonized lead guitar doing this deathly sort of waltz. Very Haunted Mansion, but with added gore. Sing-songy, but morbid. Then back into that opening riff a little bit before the hard stop that brings us into the total Ohio death metal style fucking crunch riff. So heavy.
That's what's up.
Can't get enough of stuff done like this when it's done correctly. Deathcore ain't got shit on this level of groove. Then you get an even more caveman groove riff that brings us into the real fucking just crazy lead guitar. This is what elevates this album to underground classic for me. This kind of crazy trade-off, soloing, maddening gasps of dying souls type shit. Then we're back into the more death metal-y riffage, which provides them a platform to show off the other component of the guitar soloing on this album. That being those kind of horror movie theme sounding bits, interspersed with honest to goodness fucking shredding that still maintains both a sense of catchiness and a sense of morbid, horrific fucking atmosphere. Total descent into hell style madness. Then we come back up for air with some more nasty fucking groove riffs that twist around each other, become so warped it almost kind of turns into a demi-lich sort of thing. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody in this band had some Confessor and Watchtower cassettes mixed in with the Gutted and the Obituary and the Deicide and whatnot. Another very interesting part about this album is, in a way, as it moves forward and gets more atmospheric and experimental, it kind of turns into death thrash. But not death thrash in the sense that people usually mean, you know, Protector, Demolition Hammer, that kind of thing. No, we're talking about West Coast American thrash crossbred into death metal, because they bring in a certain level of dynamism that you might hear in a band like Atrophy, where they can combine a phrase like this with balls out heavy chunk riffing along the lines of in a way that the song still actually makes sense. Like, you can kind of hear how the same sort of riff spirit was behind both of those. Similarly, in the later songs on this Lucifixion album, they'll have a part that goes like coexisting with something more along the lines of in a very late 80s, more progressive end of Bay Area thrash sort of way. I also have supporting evidence for this death thrash classification in the form of the thank you list on their demo cassette, which includes local death metal bands like Gutted, Ahriman, and Descendant, but also local thrash metal bands like Punisher and Dead Ringer, and even their local punk rock band, Kindred Idol. But most importantly, at the end, they give thanks to Deceased, which pretty much pioneered that whole sort of old school thrash and heavy metal meets death metal kind of approach. You can hear a whole lot of Deceased going on in one of my personal favorite songs on Indulge in the Macabre, that being The Grave. Speaking of the seas, this song opens up with that acoustic section I played you a little bit of earlier, over which the narrator of the song's lyrics describes his experiences of realizing he is in fact a fucking dead dude. Then of course you get a real gloomy, doom metal-y sort of riff to bring in the death metal proper before we go into another breakdown build-up, this time introduced entirely by the bass guitar. And the resultant groove metal riff is as heavy as you would expect it to be given Lucifixion's priors. Then the riff underneath gets extremely thrashy, over which we have a very nice melodic, speed metal-y sort of narrative solo. That's what I mean by death thrash. It takes elements from thrash metal and reinterprets them in a death metal manner. Speaking of which, I think we're due for another thrashy, groovy sort of riff. And the Ohioans, as you would expect, are all too happy to oblige, giving us one of those. Before we head into a much faster sort of section featuring kind of a trade-off vocal performance going on that actually reminds me a lot of the fellow Ohio band Ton. Almost kind of grindy. And it provides a great contrast with the reintroduction of that more groove-inflected riff that formed the song's backbone. That's not even the peak of gloomy atmosphere on this album. For that, we'd have to go to the song Human Puree, which is reason number 6,000,001 that I see this as being a very Halloween sort of episode, because it's got a synth line that's literally a death metal reimagining of the theme from the movie Halloween.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
And as far as heavy metal reinterpretations of the Halloween theme go, this might just be the best version I've ever heard. Really dig this mid-paced beat here, kind of riffing off of that Halloween theme before going into a more standard sort of death metal crunchy riff. Gotta have that bass guitar intro, of course, then the descending staircase, into some stuff that sounds a whole lot like a very warped American take on the first couple Grave albums. Solid, mid-paced, crunchy, crushing sort of death metal all around, as you would expect from Lucifixion. But we're not quite done with the Halloween theme yet, and that's where the song gets really special. Because they bring that back, but instead of being done on a keyboard, it's done by the distorted death metal guitars, and eventually added to by the, as always, stellar Lucifixion lead guitarist, who then starts to throw in some interesting melodic variations on that particular leitmotif, before then taking a turn into even more warped territory with some start-stop, almost jazzy bursts of micro soloing. There's been plenty of lead guitar reinterpretations of the Halloween theme over the years. At the moment I can think of Fama Corpse and Toxadeath, both of which were quite good, but I gotta say Lucifixion does it even better. And then they bring in an entirely original melody that almost kind of sounds like something you might have heard on an early Catatonia album, but instead of really echoey black metal-y guitars and weird keyboard effects, there's thick death metal guitar underneath it that eventually leads into some more fucking great solos. This album's got great solos, and it's got great fucking riffs, great vocals, bass playing, drums all around. Fantastic fucking album from this fantastic fucking band, Lucifixion, lovingly reissued in easily accessible format by the fantastic fucking Chinese label Huangchen. I do plan on eventually covering the other album that I bought from Huangchen Records, that being Corpse's Pull the Flood, at some point in the future, but I don't know if it's just the Halloween season or what. Lucifixion's really been monopolizing my time lately, hence the RFI episode. Hopefully you thought they sounded pretty cool. Maybe you'll go out and buy that reissue. Apparently they've got a second album that they recorded in like 2008 that went unreleased until 2022 when they put it out independently. I haven't been able to find a copy of that at all. Maybe someday, I don't know. But hey, thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Come on, you're the slowest magician I've ever seen.
It's a very difficult recipe.